All right, starting a couple minutes or a minute early here, guys. Let me know how the volume is as usual. Try to do a little bit of monitoring ahead of time, but you never know. See if I can get the chat working. I do see some folks in already. That's awesome. Resolve just hits different because he's built different. What? Let's get the framing right. Hello from Georgia. Is that like Georgia near Russia or Georgia, United States? Let me just change something up here, guys. Oops, changing the white balance. It's funny because like on my camera, the white balance looks like one thing, but then when I have it on my color calibrated display, it looks like another. I realize this because it's not a wide gamut on the display. So, whereas on the camera, it might be. But that's okay. USA, okay. Nice to see everybody in the chat. So yeah, I figured we could just get going here with a casual live stream hangout. Feel free to ask any questions. Last time we did a live stream with Kryn, and I want to do more of those with more folks from the community as well. I got a couple folks I'm trying to line stuff up with, but it's always a little bit more challenging to do those kind of on a whim or like whenever the schedule allows for it. So there may be something else going on that conflicts, causes a scheduling conflict. So it's not always the easiest thing to just like grab somebody from the community and make it happen. So I'm very happy that Kryn was able to do it on a basically short notice. I asked him like the day before. So but yeah, I'll have to get somebody else on again soon. And kind of sprinkled in throughout, I'll be doing these regular, just hanging out Q&A sessions. So without further ado, yeah, this is just going to be a general Q&A and hangout stream for Sunday. You can tell he's a resolved individual. Yeah. Resolved to something, I'm sure. This is just not looking right. I'm going to change it up to... There we go. That's a little better. And turn this up. Oop, that's the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so topics today. I don't have any particular topics today that I want to cover, but I always appreciate the conversation points that are a little bit more like big picture types of questions rather than just like, is this better or is that better? But there are a few things that I did have on my mind that I'd like to talk about, and I've been kind of planning on doing videos on these subjects, and most likely it'll be in a different kind of format to what I've been doing typically. Oh, is that still too bright? Sorry, guys. Maybe it's something that's good for the Resolve Goes Outside memes. This is probably the wrong, facing the wrong way. There we go. But yeah, and yes, these are the Celestees, and I absolutely love them. There's sort of like I also describe it, but there's kind of like a roundness to the way that everything sounds from it. I mean, yeah, it's not an open back headphone, so it's not as good as a Clear or something like that, but for closed back, this is this is a very engaging round sound, which I really enjoy, and I think it's partially because of the mid bass bump that it has. You sound really clear. What mic do you use listening through a pair of Aryas? The Aryas make everything sound clear. This is just an AT2020, Audio-Technica AT2020, but which is fine. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend getting a USB microphone, which is what this is. This is a USB cardioid condenser, because the problem with the USB microphones is that they're kind of limited by digital volume control that is often it for whatever reason just randomly resets, because it's kind of like, you know, it's an issue with Windows. I find that for whatever reason, like every once in a while, like your digital volumes will get reset, and that happens with this too. It hasn't been as bad lately, so maybe it's just to do with like the way they roll out updates and stuff like that. But it's like if you change something, then suddenly this changes as well. Also, one other thing I've been noticing is like when I do these streams, there's something weird going on with my camera where like the frame rate is not consistent, but it doesn't show that I'm dropping any frames. So it could actually be an issue with my capture device. So I'll need to see if that's causing the problem. But yeah, I'll get into some of the discussion topics that I had in mind in a little bit here, but I'll go through what some of the questions are first. So getting back to the microphone thing, there are ways to kind of circumvent the issues that show up with USB microphones through programs like OBS. And this is actually, I gotta give a big thanks to both Metal571 for pointing it out, and also the guy from Podcastage for showing how to improve that. But basically you just add a limiter, you add gain and then a limiter as kind of like a filter. I think it's either a filter or something like that in OBS. And so I did do that. Now I found that it's still not perfect when in situations where you heavily clip, but it's definitely better than if you didn't. So if you didn't have it on, because like if I'm talking this way, I'm facing the camera, I'm looking, I'm reading chat, but then now I'm talking directly into the microphone, and you see how it changes, or hear how it changes. You're a capture device. Now, is it the real Metal 571 or is that the imposter? But yeah, okay, so Sundara is my next headphone once AMC goes to the moon. Okay. My Allegia come in today. It's funny, like people weren't as into that headphone, and then suddenly one guy reviews it and says it's the best thing ever, and then everybody's all about it. I liked it, but it was definitely a flavored kind of sound, and I did EQ it. So for tonal balance, this is better. Which is better for detail retrieval, IEM versus over-ear headphones? Over-ear headphones. This is something that comes up a lot, and actually Corinne and I were talking about that last week as well. God, the shadows really are going crazy here. Sorry, I'll see if I can. Nope, that's the wrong thing. Here we go. Is that better? That's better. Yeah, so something we talked about in the last one, and it's that there are cases where IEMs are going to be better than headphones. They're like at a similar price bracket, right? And for specific use case, specific use case. Like for example, there are a lot of closed back headphones out there that are not particularly good. And in those cases, there are going to be IEMs that are going to do a better job of what you're looking for. But strictly speaking, one-to-one, like headphones at a given price versus IEMs at a given price, you can get more from headphones than you can at IEMs. And I know there's people who disagree with that, but that's just sort of how I hear stuff. Like I'll listen to really high-end IEMs for a while, and then I'll go to like an HE6, and it's like, no. Yeah, IEMs can't do that. Oh, so Zavara is your next headphone. Okay, I gotcha. That's yeah. That is an endgame headphone. I'm not liking the look of this either. Maybe I'll just go back to the high contrast. Yeah, it's weird. It's like the capture card makes it skip every once in a while. Oh well. As long as you guys can hear me, right? See that looks like some issue is happening. If I wave. What is a good cheap headphone amplifier? There's lots of good cheap headphone amplifiers. You know, there's the Magni 3 Heresy. Wow, it's really messing up. That's so unfortunate. It's like it's stuttering. And it's not the camera, so I'm pretty sure it's the capture device. It's just getting worse and worse, isn't it? What if I remove this? What's this? That's the USB device. Wow, okay, I'm gonna have to... I may have to restart the capture device here, guys, because this is terrible. 1 second. I'm still here. And now I'm frozen. This is great. All right. Technology has failed me yet again. So I think I'm back. All right. So I see a question here. How much have you seen hardware go up in price due to component shortages? It appears to have a smaller effect on audiophile gear, but perhaps the wave hasn't hit yet. So I actually think it's not going to hit as bad, as significantly for this kind of stuff as it does for other industries, and specifically like, you know, PC components and stuff like that, or like, you know, chip shortages, because that's really what's been hitting it. So I would almost imagine that it would hit like the DAP stuff harder, because that's where you do need that kind of stuff. And the other thing that we might see is some weirdness and shortages going on there when it comes to AKM DAC chips, because the factory had a massive fire. So depending on how long it takes them to kind of, you know, scale that up. Now you'll probably be able to get the stuff that has those devices already in it, that are already, you know, made and they've already got them, but there is going to be a certain gap there for AKM chips. But yeah, I don't think that this industry is big enough to where we'll be that affected by it personally, and very likely not for you know, transducers and stuff like that, because that's not based on the same industries that have seen, you know, issues and shortfalls. And yeah, we're not dependent on, you know, yields and things like that for like, you know, chip manufacturers are. That's a good question though. I see a lot of super chats come in, so I'm gonna have to go to some of these. Greg, thank you. Wow. I currently own the Hifiman Arya, and I'm thinking about buying the Verite Open along with the pendant amp. What's your opinion on the Verite Open versus Hifiman Arya in terms of detail, soundstage, etc.? Okay, so I'm gonna recommend getting the Verite Closed over the Open, even though I own the Open, because the Verite Closed, I think, I mean, it depends on which one you get and the pads and all that stuff, but like, I think the Verite Closed has a more balanced tuning, at least from the one that I heard, very briefly. And then independent, yeah, I mean, that's a good combo. As far as detail, yeah, I mean, I actually think that you're comparing apples to oranges here, because the Arya is a planar. So what you're going to get for the perception of detail and clarity and all that stuff is you're going to get better instrument separation and control on the Arya. It's a little brighter as well, so you get a little bit more kind of clarity there. But the soundstage is going to be bigger in the Arya too, and more depth and sense of openness. But what you're going to get with the Verite is you're going to get better dynamics. You're going to get better sense of punch, and also you're going to get a good, a more kind of like quote unquote euphonic character to it. There's especially with the pendant, along with really interesting texture there. So it's not like one is categorically better for detail, I don't think. Maybe a little bit better for instrument separation on the Arya, but then noticeably better for dynamics with the Verite. That's kind of how I would frame that. But then, of course, with the pendant tube amp, you're going to get a really kind of involved presentation as well that you won't get from the Arya. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as saying one is better than the other there. But they're a good complement. DCS Bartok versus MSB reference headphone amp. I haven't heard either of those, so I can't. But thank you. I can't comment. I know a lot of people like the DCS Bartok, so that's especially for the high end stuff. I do have a Bakun in right now, and I'm going to be evaluating that with the Susvara and comparing that. I mean, I'm also looking to get a speaker amp in just to satisfy drifting buddies. But yeah, I'm going to be comparing the Susvara on a number of different amps, and the Bakun is one of them. And so everybody is like, well, it's the one that everybody says is like the right synergy for the Susvara. But yeah, that's the only experience I'm going to have with that stuff. But yeah, DCS Bartok is like crazy from what I hear as well. I think this is the thing with a lot of that stuff. Like, you don't need that stuff to drive those headphones. It's like that's like if you want to spend stupid amounts of money and get like the ultra true high end like end game type of stuff. If you're incredibly wealthy, then yeah, that stuff's going to be really good. But you don't need that to get yourself up and running. In some ways, I'd say like if you're gonna get into endgame stuff, yeah, sure, buy a Susvara, but then it's also ridiculously expensive. But then you can run that off of like so much stuff that's under $1,000, and start there, under $500 even, and then save up more money and get yourself whatever the crazy high end amp is that you want as well. Did you hear the ER2XR? If so, what did you think? I've heard it a long time ago. I think it's very cool. It's a very good tuning, but I can't handle the penetrative aspect of those IEMs. I can't deal with that. It's very unpleasant for me. Buzz, thank you. Buzz, did I get that right? That you're Rob? Yeah. Again, man. Thank you very much. But like, let me know if you have a question, because yeah. You often send super chats without question or comment there. So if you'd like to, let me know. You can ask a question from Australia. Thanks for joining. Yeah, feel free to ask. I'll try to go through them, but it's like I'm gonna prioritize the super chats. But don't feel like you have to super chat. Like, I'm not gonna. This isn't meant to take your money or anything. Put your money towards audio gear. Better headphones. Or if you're happy with what you have, then yeah, by all means. GPU prices are horrible nowadays. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get a 3080 fairly early on, because I was kind of strategic about which one I wanted to get. It was one that was like maybe a little bit more expensive, because it was like it was one of the overclocked, like factory overclocked cards. And people weren't buying it because the review sites were like, you could just do this yourself. So when people were getting in line, they weren't getting in line for that one. And so I was like, oh, I know that one's there's going to be less of a lineup for it. So I'm going to put my name on that one, even though I paid an extra $25 that I probably didn't need to. But it's worth it if you're, if you need one, which I needed it for, rendering stuff. So, Jake, thank you. Hi, should I say for Susvara or get a Verite? I already have ADX 5000, but my amp isn't powerful enough to drive the Sus properly. I have no idea about that amp. But the Susvara surprisingly doesn't actually require a ton of power. If you want to get the most out of the Susvara, the main thing you're going to need, you need an amplifier, yes, but you're mainly going to want an amplifier that has high current. And that's why people are doing all the speaker amp stuff with it. But you don't need that to technically, as far as actual power requirements, even a Magni Heresy is good enough for that. Now, I'm not going to say, get a Magni Heresy for this as far. I'm going to say something like an IHA6 is probably the way to go there. But that's not that expensive. And then, yeah, like after that, you save up for one of those crazy amps, sure. And it will change. Like it does change depending on the amplifier. Chris Cads. Oh, sorry. To answer that question. I think those are two very different headphones in very different price brackets. So I don't think that it's something like, it's sort of like, do you want a hyper detailed endgame reference sounding headphone that is like literally the best that exists? Then that's the Susvara. If do you want something that is more flavored, more colored, but not necessarily in a bad way, like more euphonic sounding, then get the Verite. But I think that it's like this is something that I do want to get into in this, and it's that there's often like a bit of a gap when it comes to understanding the nuances of this stuff, where people often think, should I get this or that, as a function of one is just going to sound better than the other. And it's not like that. Like I don't think it's I mean, in this case, yes, I do think the Susvara sounds better, but like in general, it's not like you can just say categorically A is better than B. There might be things that A does better than B, but there might also be things that B does better than A. And so what it is that you value and what it is that you're keying in on and indexing for is the thing that's going to matter more. If you just want a reference sound, like really good high quality sound, you can get that with an AKG K371. It's not that detailed, but or dynamic, it's not that technically impressive, but that is, you can be finished if you just care about tonal balance, which for some people that's all they care about. Now I'd argue that they're not particularly discerning, or they're not paying attention, the same amount of attention that people who are indexing harder for other aspects are. But because tonal balance is a very obvious thing. But things like microdynamics and micro detail and macrodynamics and soundstage and all the rest of that stuff, depth, that's stuff that not everybody is going to value equally. So if you want crazy soundstage, then HD800S at the cost of not having as good punch and slam. So and it doesn't, like, I'd say, for detail, it's pretty good too, but compared to a Susvara, no. Even though it has a better soundstage, larger soundstage than the Susvara. So, and as an example here, like I brought some headphones when I was visiting my family, not that long ago. Back in February, I brought some headphones with me, to just sort of get their takes. They're non-audiophiles, and it's always fun to like try putting high-end headphones on people who are not used to it at all. And I put the first one I tried was the Focal Stelia, and the second one was the SHP 9500, and the third one was the Hifiman Arya. And everybody loved the Arya more so than everything else by a mile. Now obviously it's open versus closed, and there are certain things about the Arya that are better, but it just indicated that they were indexing harder for openness and soundstage and those types of qualities over dynamics and punch, which I think is a common thing. I think for most people it's kind of like that, but not everybody. There's a lot of people who will be looking more for punch and slam, in which case something like this would even be better, even though the soundstage isn't, there's nothing. This is a particularly intimate presentation. So it really just depends. Like, I know people who love the HD650, which is here somewhere, and they don't care that it's the 3-blob, poor imaging and poor sound quality. Sorry, it's got good sound quality, poor imaging and poor soundstage. But they love the tightness and separation and the smoothness and micro detail and all that stuff. So it really depends on the person, and it's not as straightforward as just saying A is better than B. Even though I get that that's what a lot of people are asking. That a lot of people will just want a very simple answer. But it also goes to like another important, I guess, conversation that's much bigger than just this hobby. But there seems to be this sort of like, it's either great or it's terrible aspect to literally everything to do with information about a given product, such that it becomes difficult to express nuance in any meaningful way, because people are expecting 10 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, and there's no room in between. So, and I think that's just like it's kind of like a lowering of the intelligence or IQ that's from an audience perspective. Like it's like you're just dumbing it down, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people who are writing reviews or doing this kind of content creation are gonna have to struggle with in the future, because it's like, how do you navigate any kind of nuance when people are just expecting the low intelligence, the answer of buy it or don't buy it, because there's so much more to it than that, and it's a shame in my opinion. Chris, thank you. Have you ever done earbud, not IEM reviews? I feel like this form factor is underrepresented. They are like open back IEMs. Example, Moondrop Chaconi. I'm not familiar with that one. So I don't really do the earbud stuff because for me they always just fall out. The only earbuds that I used and reviewed were the AirPods Pro. And even then, I mean, even then they didn't they would fall out as well. So I'm not a huge fan of earbuds. I do have an upcoming budget true wireless earbud / IEM shootout, and some of those are more earbud form factor. But they all suck. They're all terrible, except for the earphone free. Well, I don't want to give everything away, but there are two of them, including the earphone free Pro, that are decent. Thanks again, Buzz. All right, let's get into some more questions here. Do you think there are any underrated old headphones which are worth buying today? Feel like people hype up new stuff too much. I kind of agree, but there's a limit. Like if you're talking like old vintage stuff, no. I think we're so much further along as far as like people having figured out what stuff should be tuned for than we were in the past. But old stuff, the HD650 is actually a really old headphone. Sorry, I have the K371 and the HD650 on the same little stand, but the 650 is a super old headphone to the point where it's almost becoming like a classic or vintage, and I think it's still great. Same thing with HD600. Like they're both still great headphones. So if you're talking like that long ago, then yeah, I think that stuff is still competitive today, if not the preferred thing to get at the price point. Especially because you can get the 650 now as the 6XX at $220, right? Again, depending on what you're indexing for. Other stuff, yeah, the HE6, if you can find one. This came out in 2011, so HE6, HE500, that stuff is now 10 years old, and it's still like the HE6 is still the best headphone under $2,000. The original HE6, not the SEs or the SEV2. Those I put them closer to like $1,200 kind of sound quality. I mean, it's hard to put a price tag to sound quality. That's you can give maybe a range. And when it was on sale, the Atrium sale for like 800 or whatever it was, or 700, yeah, that would be a crazy deal for the V2. But the V1, not. I don't think it really holds a candle to the original HE6. Which is funny because you saw in some forums that people are saying, "Oh yeah, it's like it's better." No. It is both for tonal balance and for technical performance. It's not, and it actually in my mind goes to show that like not everybody's actually even listening to the headphones, or if they are, they're not really paying attention because it's not close. I like that UDMS and a reviews said all positive things about the Allegia when they was $1,000 and I was looking for closebacks for $400. I couldn't help myself. I have Anandas. I can't wait. It'd be good. That's a good compliment there to the Anandas. I mean, actually, closebacks in general are tough because it's harder to tune stuff. And if you're if you just care about tuning and you're looking for a closeback, the K371 all day. But that doesn't really satisfy people who are looking for a lot of detail and separation and slam and stuff like that. And so you'd want to go higher, And that's why, I like these. The Aeon 2 Noir with the perforated pads is good there too, but it doesn't have the dynamics. This has the dynamics. But yeah, $400, that's solid. I have an EQ profile that I put together somewhere for the Elegia. But yeah, it's I think at $400, that's a good deal. Oh, I see people asking about the Susvara giveaway and the US proxy shipping. I'm not in control of any of that, so I can't give you an answer on that one. I bought a Focal Clear Pro headphones, and I'm currently testing out shit Magni 3 Plus versus the shit Heresy. Could I get your opinion on which works better for those headphones? Doesn't matter. Just does not. Pick whichever color you like best. Have you tried the Yodenheim 2? Are they good enough to power this as far as? I haven't, but I imagine that they would be sufficient to power this as far as. They have a balanced output, if I remember correctly. So yeah, you could probably power the Susvara with that just fine. Is it the best for Susvara? No, but it's totally sufficient. Again, you can power a Susvara with the Magni 3 Heresy. I'm not going to recommend that, but you don't need a crazy amount of power. And people are always like, yeah, you need like at least 7 watts. No. Even like 2 to 3 watts for an HE6 is probably, all the power all the actual output power that you need. But what gets missed often, I think, is the requirements or benefits of high current, in which case you would want to go with something else. And I think these inefficient planars really do benefit from that. At least it's been my experience with, trying different amps and like, the IHE6 versus the Rebel amp, where I was kind of comparing them back and forth. The Rebel amps, I liked it better with the dynamic driver headphones, and I liked the IHE6 better with stuff like the head audio headphone and the planars and stuff like the inefficient planars and stuff like that out of the balanced output. So yeah, I think it just depends. And you can certainly do a lot better than that as well. Like that's just like a mid-level amplifier, right? A90, no, I hate the A90. I think it's terrible. A lot of people bought the A90 because it scored well on Synad. Yay! But yeah, it's a limp, flaccid, mushy-sounding amplifier. At least in my opinion. Very sterile. Very sterile amplifier. And if you want engagement, that's not the one that I would go with. Pablo, thank you. I prefer Amazon Music HD for lossless streaming, but hi-fi content creators only ever talk about Tidal, Qobuz, and now Apple. Am I missing something? This is an interesting question, and it's one that I think merits investigation and further study. I stopped using Tidal because, the MQA, I'm just going to call it MQA madness at this point, isn't the reason why I got rid of my Tidal subscription. Tidal had terrible buffering, constant buffering issues, and I went for months without them being able to fix it, and I just thought, all right, this is such an obvious issue, and if they can't fix this, that why would I continue to pay for the service? So I stopped. And the crazy thing about Tidal and the whole MQA thing is that now there are alternative services. There's an allegation that has quite a bit of ammunition against Tidal that suggests that it's all just snake oil and bullshit. And if you watch Golden's 2 videos on that, he's done a fairly good job of explaining the issues with Tidal, which is more so that there's no way to actually test and verify their claims. But to me, none of that matters. Like I think it's, I agree with his takes about that. Like they need to make it possible for people to actually test this stuff. But the reason why I think it doesn't really matter is because there are services that have lossless available now anyways. So why do we care whether or not MQA is lossless when we can just use a lossless service? And a lot of the claims about from MQA is even more ridiculous, that it's better than lossless, which is like, okay, so what are you doing? But yeah, I think, why would I bother with something that it's just meant to be it's meant to be a content delivery method that is as good as lossless, when lossless is also available and doesn't have buffering issues, like, for example, through Amazon Music HD and soon to be Spotify. I mean, I think maybe there's some question marks around the players and the codecs that get involved, and, like, for example, for 320, not all 320 is the same, with Spotify as an example. But yeah, I mean, like, once, and maybe it's going to come out with more information about that, but the thing is, like, Tidal's player kind of sucked anyway. So, if we're saying that's the reason to prefer one over the other, like, because of the player or the codec or whatever, Tidal's not in the lead there either. So I kind of think, what's the point? Like, I'm kind of at a loss for why anybody would bother using Tidal and giving a shit about MQA at all, when we have lossless stuff, like lossless streaming platforms, available. And all things being equal, if everybody had the same libraries, I don't know why you would care about MQA at all. Now, the reality is that they don't all have the same libraries. But even then, Tidal doesn't have the widest variety of stuff either. I think that still goes to Spotify. So I think it's going to be interesting what happens with Spotify when Spotify's HiFi comes out. But they've kind of been beaten to the punch by both Amazon HD and Apple. So I mean, they did this big announcement, and then Amazon HD and Apple was like, all right, here we go with all of the high res stuff, and then Amazon HD reduced their prices for their high res stuff, and Qobuz is there as well with the actual high res. Like Qobuz and Amazon would both have FLAC, but I actually think Qobuz is the one that has the 24-bit 96K stuff, whereas the Amazon HD stuff is, I'm not entirely sure they have as much of a library for the 24-bit files as Qobuz does, even though Qobuz doesn't have a massive library either. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of this. But right now, I think, as much as I used Tidal up until this year, I was like, that was the most common way for me to use it, particularly because of Rune. I think Tidal is unless they do something drastic to change up everything, I actually think they are in last place for me now, because it's like there's no point to MQA, and they have these really bad issues with buffering that makes it just like difficult to use. So, and I know there's a lot of people saying that they use Tidal, but ask yourself this question: do you use Tidal because you think that MQA is better than lossless? In which case, you'd probably have to sort of take a look at that and go, do you really think that? If so, why? Or do you use Tidal because you're used to using Tidal, and that's where all your music is, and that's where all your playlists are? Because for years that was like the better alternative to Spotify, and it's just annoying and inconvenient to move to another platform. And to that, I'd have to say, yeah, I completely agree, and that's why I've been hesitant. That's why it's taken me this long to move away from Tidal as well. But I thought to myself, I'm doing this now, vocationally, and I can't deal with these buffering issues anymore. So I'm just not going to bother. By the way, I'm not sure that the buffering issues are consistent with Tidal everywhere in the world, but where I am in Canada, it's like completely like, it's not that it's unusable, because the file does play and the music does play, but what's unusable is if you're trying to test headphones and you're trying to test the same section of a track on multiple headphones, and you're trying to do that quickly to preserve your auditory memory. With Tidal, it would just constantly buffer rebuffer every time I'd go back to that same point in the track. So I was like, well, this is just not functioning the way that I need it to function for my job. So I'm not going to use it anymore. The Apple stuff with the Dolby thing is kind of interesting. I'm not totally sold on it, because if you think about the music that you actually listen to, do you listen to it because it's a particular file format or a particular like I mean, I know this gets into the whole question about title and MQA and the masters and stuff like that, but like as a case study or as an example, were people deliberately listening to like title masters just because they were masters, or because they actually wanted to listen to those albums? I think maybe a little bit of both there, maybe to some extent. But for me, when it came down to it, it would always only ever be like, oh, this happens to be title masters. Okay. You know, I was never in a situation where I listened to something just because it was a master's recording. I mean, at the very least, it was a nice little indicator that these would be typically good sounding or well recorded albums, because they kind of fudged it a little bit with that. But yeah, I think that same demarcation or delineation is going to happen with Apple and the Dolby Atmos stuff, where I mean, maybe there's going to be some people who gravitate to that platform because they want to try it out, and they're like, oh, like let's take a look at these specific things that are made for this content specific type of stuff. But I'm not the kind of person who does that. And I was even joking with DMS on Twitter about this, where he was saying it was actually pretty cool for the content that has it, just not with the AirPods Max, which is a little bit ironic. But that's just because that headphone sucks, I think. But I was kind of responding to that, saying, like, do they have my super obscure jazz tracks that have been recorded in like the 80s and 90s that I like to listen to? Like, probably not, right? So I don't know if I would be inclined to move to that platform just for that type of content, unless it has some way of like changing the stuff that I like to be that format, which I don't think it can. I don't know of any service that does that yet. But in principle, it's kind of cool. And I think that the bigger question is, what should stuff be mastered for? And Corinne and I actually got into this subject a little bit in the last stream, but I think these days more people are listening to music on headphones than through any other method, through speakers, because headphones are so ubiquitous these days. The only area I think where people are actually more likely to listen to music through speakers is in their cars, where I don't think any of this really matters. So I would almost want the recording industry to kind of move towards recording for headphones, which in some ways would mean recording for mastering for and recording for binaural stuff, which is totally like it's a totally different experience and much more lifelike experience. And I think it'd be so cool to have more of that stuff available. But yeah, at the moment, that's not the salient thing that makes me choose one platform over another. Good bar, thank you. Do you have a question? If you do, I can't see it. Cam G, also thank you. Let me see if I can find yours. I listen QI because I like it when my SAC changes color, DAC changes color. Yeah, fair enough. There were some really good memes about that. Anyways, that's a bit of a tangent, but yeah, and with Qobuz, it's not available in Canada. I know, I'm sure I could do some VPN stuff, but it's there's also a convenience factor to that. Are amps and DACs mostly snake oil? No, they're not snake oil. It's just that there's not as much value there. Like, people will buy a pair of $500 headphones and they'll buy a $500 amp. And it's like, you could have just spent $1,000 on a pair of headphones and bought a $200, or use whatever amp you had, and you would have got a better experience doing that. That's the only thing. That's the only issue I have. I don't have any issue with like amps and DACs. They do make a difference. It's just that the difference is not proportional to the price you pay when compared to the differences that you get if you put that money into headphones. And there is an exception to that, and it's the high-end tube amps, because that stuff really makes a difference like nothing else. And I could easily see somebody being like, yeah, I'm gonna get this crazy high-end amplifier, and my endgame headphones are 650 as an example, or 600, right? I can see that, but like I also think there are limits to that too. So like I think, you know, a Focal Clear is gonna be better than an HD600 off of an amplifier at the same price. I just, yeah. And then if you're talking about the scaling there, because they do scale, and they do take on the characteristics of an amplifier a little bit more so, when you're talking at the over the $2,000 price tags, that comparison breaks down even more, where suddenly you can get an HD800S, or I don't know, just as an example, right? You can get higher end headphones for those price tags. But no, they're not snake oil. I mean, some of them probably are, but in general, they do make a difference. Yeah. There's vids on YouTube showing the MQA is all but lossless. A YouTube channel managed to get some test tones into MQ. Are you talking about Golden's video? Yeah. So everybody should watch that video. Or you did 2 videos. Yeah. But there's a lot of people who, you know, went to bat for MQA and Tidal, and they got quite, you know, riled up, and there was even a response from MQA, which was mostly red herrings, like from that they published on their site. Like even just as somebody reading it, like if you have somewhat of a reasonable bullshit detector, you'd realize that the responses there were like setting up straw man arguments and things like that were just not like I could see why they did that. I just don't think that it did them any favors, when mainly he was asking for a little bit of transparency. And then the flip side of that is that like they're under no obligation to provide that transparency. But the problem is that when they make certain claims that have been like, well, shown to be objectively false, you know, they gotta explain that a little bit. And the response that they had didn't do any work to, you know, help their case. All right, let's see what else. Did I miss any of the super chats? I'll try and. Just as an example, I was using Rune for a long time, and Rune with Tidal, and now I mostly just use Amazon HD. And I will likely try out some of the Apple stuff. I'm a little hesitant about that because I don't like installing Apple software on my PC. But yeah, I might try that stuff out as well. And then when Spotify gets its, you know, HD stuff going, or whatever's going on there, I'll probably try that as well. And the price is another thing. If you already have Amazon Prime, that starts to be a little bit more, I don't know, it starts to be quite a bit more competitive. So yeah. All right, let's see what's next. What IEM do you prefer to the U12T? Nothing. Like that's the thing. Like there's IEMs that have better technical performance than the U12T, and there's IEM like I just really like that type of tuning when it comes to IEMs. So that's why I love the SA6, because it's basically the same kind of tuning, just not as, you know, technically impressive. And the U12T is like the pinnacle of that. So that's why it's my favorite IEM. I mean, the only one that kind of comes close there is that actually I'd say even beats it for certain genres is the Empire Ears Odin. But that one, like, I wouldn't want it as my like go-to for just like all the variety of stuff that I listen to, because it's a little bit less forgiving in the upper mids, whereas that's actually where the U12T is like particularly forgiving. So for all the garbage that I like, the U12T is better, or it's more convenient, I should say. It's not better, it's just more convenient. Binaural recordings are so stupid good compared to regular recordings. I really wish more artists were doing it. So some people don't like binaural recordings, but there are also examples of binaural recordings that aren't really done all that well. So I think that's really where that comes in. And so yeah, I think I generally agree that like if you want something to sound lifelike and correct through headphones, the only real way to do that is with binaural recordings. But we're so used to hearing regular non-binaural recordings with headphones that when you move to that, it can sound a little bit jarring and a little bit weird. Also typically warmer, which isn't always great. And yeah, because not that many people are doing it or doing it correctly, it's not as common, and it's not as commonly lauded. But yeah, I think that would do a lot of work to to getting better sound quality of headphones. But there is also an element of like the way that we're used to listening to regular recordings through headphones, where you are able to like be more incisive and hear more details and more separation and all that stuff that is actually potentially more enjoyable, even though it's less realistic. So I'm on board with that too. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why I just generally like headphones, is because there is a hyper realistic element to listening to headphones. Like hyper as in like more realistic, more realistic. There's a hyper vivid element to the details that you get with headphones that you don't really get the same way in real life when you're listening to music, at a concert or something like that. Let's see what's next here. Thoughts on the LCD-2 Closed? Is it worth getting alongside LCD-2F for some office listening? What about the LCD-2 Closed versus the LCD-XC? I actually need to do that comparison because I have an LCD-2 Closed, a new one in the office or in the studio where the render or the measurement rig is. So I'll need to do that and do some comparisons because I haven't had a chance to yet. I would expect it with the new pads to be pretty close, just like maybe not as technical, but we'll see. Because with the LCD XC, they did change the circuit, and as far as I understand with the LCD-2 Closed, they didn't. But the LCD-2 Closed also, from my understanding, was the LCD-2 Classic Closed, which is not on the same level as the LCD-2F. The Classic is not as good as the F. Let's see. If I can't tell much difference between $100 headphones and $300 headphones, should I really be investing in something even more expensive? It depends on the $100 and $300 headphones. There are a lot of $300 headphones that aren't very good. And the $100 headphones, there's nothing that's particularly good, but there's also some stuff out there that, punches above its price point. So I'd say it depends on what you have. If you're looking at entry-level stuff, HD6XX with an amplifier, Hifiman Sendar with an amplifier, those are the things to strive for to really be able to get good sound quality at a low price. If you don't have an amplifier, HD560S would be the way to go. And that's what, around $200. HD560S, yeah, is what I would look at. But the thing, like, people often say, like, I hear this argument a lot of like, oh, why would I even care about getting into higher end headphones or speakers or whatever? I can't tell that difference. Yes, you can. You, like, anybody can hear that difference. It's just about how much you're paying attention. So for some people who don't care about the way their music sounds and they just want music to be a background noise, then yeah, sure, then that's probably not going to be an important difference. But if you care about how your music sounds, you absolutely can hear a difference, and you will hear a difference with higher end stuff. LCD-2 Closed are not the best sound isolating. Yeah, they're not the greatest at that because of kind of the way that they kind of just hang there, right? Like, they do close it off, and they do prevent sound from leaking out, sort of, but they're not like hyper. They're not like these. Like these, the Celestee is super isolating. The point where like somebody walks into the room here, like my girlfriend walks in, and I'm like, it freaks me out because I didn't realize that somebody was there. You just bought LCDi4. While it's amazing, I don't like how it sounds very light. I don't like how it sounds very light for my taste. Is there any IEM sound like the Abyss AB? I mean, that would be it. I don't. Planars and IEMs are a massive challenge to do because, well, there's a number of reasons, but with planars you're somewhat constrained by the actual size of the diaphragm, and if you're trying to put that into a very small form factor, I guess you are with anything, but it's a challenge with planars. So yeah, I mean, apparently the technical performance of that thing, the i4, is insane, and that's the only thing that would be close to the Abyss stuff. But yeah, I'm really not sure. I can't answer that. Does that mean the tube amp pairing for the O2 really is just the pendant? No, you could pair that with other stuff too, but I'm sure the pendant is good. Any tube amp worth it under 1,000 for ZMFs? So my take on tube amps is that they're really, like, if you're gonna get into tube amps, you might as well just save up and get into the high-end tube amps. I don't really see a point, because the value that you get from solid-state amplifiers under $1,000 is really high, and that same value doesn't really exist for tube amps. Like, yes, you can get tube amps. There are tube amps that are decent at around that price, but when stuff really starts making a difference, it's unfortunately at the $2,000 mark. At least that's been my experience with it so far. Do you think the Arya is a significant step up from the Ananda? Yes and no. For technical performance, the Arya is clearly better. It's got more depth and better layering and all that stuff. The Ananda, I'm going to go out and limit it and say actually has a more balanced frequency response. The Arya is kind of like this, like, it's got like more bass extension and more elevated bass, but at the same time it's also a little brighter in the treble. So yeah, I'd say, I mean, yes, it is a step up, but a significant one. It's not like you're getting twice the headphone, but it is better. Yeah, definitely. The Arya is like potentially somebody's end game, I think. Like, that's if that's the kind of sound that you like, with that really solid layering and depth and forward presentation, yeah, then that's really solid. But yeah, it is also a little brighter. I lost my place here. Was there ever a headphone you were tremendously excited for that you put on and immediately knew, like, no, this is not the one? Gold planar GL2000. As Corinne was saying before, like, there's stuff when you have like experience with a wide range of stuff, and you generally get a sense of what sounds right. When you put on something that sounds wrong, like very wrong immediately, it does not take you any amount of time to know that. You go, oh no, this is wrong. Like, you want to go through like a set of tracks, because that's always an important part of it. Like, if you're listening to a track that has weirdness going on in the mastering, then you might not know that. But if you're just going through your regular test tracks that you know are well recorded, and something immediately sounds wrong, then yeah, it doesn't take very long. Like and the Gold Planar GL2000 was that example. Let's see. It's rather simple when it comes to MQA. Their PR destroyed their defense. Transparency and openness to testing is a critical issue, but bad people skills is sinking them. That's certainly one argument. Alex, thanks. I have $2,000 max to spend on the best headphones, closed/open on the market with minimum power requirement. Please advise accordingly. Well, that's what I'm saying, man. It's like, it depends on what you are indexing for. Best isn't a universal constant. It's not like for that same reason that I mentioned earlier, like there are people who will listen to the Arya and say, oh, I love this more than the Clear because it has a bigger soundstage, and that's what they care about more so than dynamics. Then there are people who will listen to the Clear and love that more over the Arya or the HE6 because even though it doesn't have much for soundstage, it's got way better punch. So, like, best is like, I'm not gonna say that it's all just like relative and everything is all subjective, because it's not. There there are boundaries for what constitutes good sound quality, but there are different qualities and nuances for each headphone that you got to figure out what you like before you sort of make that judgment call. Now, to answer the question as best I can, if you got $2,000 to spend on the best headphones, closed or open on the market with minimum power requirements, as in you don't have an amplifier, I'm gonna say Focal Clear. Although that's $2,000. Because HE600S, it's a 300 ohm headphone. You'd want an amp for that. Hifiman Arya, you'd want an amp for that. LCD X, you don't really need an amp for that, but I think I would probably, like, if I'm not going to EQ anything, I probably would still take a Clear over the LCD X. What else is around $2,000 that is good? Well, if you can find yourself a Hifiman HE6, that also has crazy power requirements, so that doesn't count. Yeah, it's tough. I would maybe say Focal Clear there, because it's a 55 ohm headphone, and you can run it off of just about anything. Other headphones that you can run off just about anything that are high end, the LCD X is one of them. I'd say between LCD X, Focal Clear, the Hifiman Ananda can be run off of literally whatever you want. You can run it off of a phone. LCD-2F is in that conversation, depending on how you feel about the LCD X and the tuning there. Yeah, I would say it's among those, because the rest of them do take power requirements. So good news, you don't need to spend $2,000. Maybe there's some E-stats that I haven't heard, that are in that price range. Cam, Apple always wins up to 24-bit 192 for $999. So also, just on that note, 24-bit 192, you don't need that. The 24-bit 96K stuff from Qobuz, you can't tell me that you're going to hear more out of 192 than 96K. Right? It's a bigger number, but it's basically meaningless. But also, I mean, if this is what I was saying, if you already have Amazon Prime, then suddenly that becomes super competitive, like the Amazon Music HD, because they reduced the price. And I think it was partly in response to Apple's stuff. So right now, I don't know what the answer is on that. I think, obviously the Apple fanboys are gonna, get into the Apple stuff because they're already using it, in which case, of course. But if you're not, is there a reason to go with that over Amazon HD? I don't know yet. And I think a lot of that is gonna, because Amazon is also it's also FLAC, and then there's also Qobuz that gets thrown into the ring. The thing that makes me a little bit worried for folks like Qobuz, and to a certain extent Tidal, is that Amazon and Apple are these sort of juggernauts as far as what they're able to do for, content delivery. And so these other organizations are really going to have to do something to set themselves apart to make us, and including Spotify to a certain extent. Even though Spotify is another sort of juggernaut in this space, but these smaller ones are going to have to do something meaningful as far as, why would we choose them over these other platforms that have larger content libraries? Spotify's still got the largest content platform as far as I'm aware. But also Apple, what is there a sound quality reason why we would go with these other ones now? Less so than there was before. So that's really what this is doing, is it's kind of crowding out the smaller, folks like Qobuz and Deezer and Tidal. Will you do, or anyone at the Headphone Show or headphones.com be taking a look at the Sony WF-1000 XM4s? Yes, we did order one. By the way, we don't get advanced copies. We just buy them for this stuff. So I have one on order, and I'm not encouraged by what I've seen from frequency response. But we'll see, because there's a lot of that stuff where you can, like with apps, you can fine tune stuff, usually with the Sonys. So I'll see what I can do there. Let's see. Wait, did I use the same thumbnail that I did for the Susvara giveaway? No, it's a different photo, I think. But I can see why it'd be, yeah, mistaken. Okay, let's see. I think a lot of people have a very binary mindset about products now. Something is either the best or garbage. Yeah, and this is the problem, not just to do with the headphone stuff, but to do with just like everything. And I saw there was a photo that got posted to like Reddit, not the headphone Reddit, but like Reddit in general, like a while ago, where it was like some, it was like some, not a bot farm, but like a review farm, where they had like a ton of different, like basically a series of walls of iPads with people giving like, you know, 5-star reviews to things online. And that to me is like, that's kind of what's breaking it, is because in so many ways, traditional advertising and marketing has needed to kind of evolve with people not trusting it anymore. Because people trust real people over, you know, traditional marketing. So because of that, I've talked about this a few times, but because of that, they're doing these types of things to kind of like catch up. And that I see as having a particularly negative influence on the idea of nuance in general, because now people expect it to be either full 5 stars. You just look at the stuff that's on Amazon. People expect it to be full 5 stars or terrible, and that means that if something is not 5 stars, that people think it's terrible, and so it's totally skewing the way that people think of these ratings, which they perceive to be done by real people, even though in many cases they're not. And then this is also influencing or it's permeating, you know, the people like what I'm doing, like, you know, reviewers, or the like. It's not just YouTube here, because I'm talking about like anybody who's writing information or articles about products as well, where, you know, because the audience has a certain expectation about what people are going to say, or at least there's an expectation that's emerging as a result of this binary, you put it there, well, I think a binary mindset, that's making it difficult to actually communicate that nuance that does exist with this stuff. So yeah, I am finding it increasingly difficult as a result of that, and I do worry that like this advertising or marketing catch up is kind of like killing the trust that people place in real people or people who are, you know, experts on one thing or another, because suddenly they're no longer being called upon to give their nuanced or express their nuanced opinion, and success there is determined more by just, you know, shilling or saying that something is great or saying something is terrible. And that's the story for all this stuff is so much more complicated than that, and I think that's a real shame. Biswadeep, thank you for that, but let me know what your question is. I saw you. Oh wait, I see another one here. Hi Andrew, love to see you wearing a Radiance. I'm not wearing a Radiance. This is the Celestee. Can you suggest me an amp between $1,500 to run them? How do they compare to the Stellia? So this is not the Radiance, this is the Celestee. This is the slightly lower priced one. The Radiance is a little more laid back than this one, and I found the Radiance to be a little more comfortable. The clamp is a little tighter on this one, I find, but it might be that the pads are different. And no, you can get a $1,500 amp to run them, but you don't need that. So if I'm trying to think about what the best thing to run this with. The main thing you don't want to do is run it with something that's more made for like a planar, like something that is like a high, IHA6 or something like that. I would go with something that's a little bit more like voltage based. So 1500. I don't know, how much is the Chord stuff, like the Hugo 2? I'm not sure. Let's just find out. Chord Hugo 2. How much is that? Might be too expensive. And also it depends on where you are, I guess, in the world. Because that's more expensive. It's like 2,500 or something like that. So yeah, that's probably out of the budget. I'm not sure. 1,500, maybe something from SPL. I think they have some lower end stuff there. But yeah, typically not the high current stuff that you would use for a planar. Like this IHA6 is a bad match for that. I honestly, $1,500, like it depends also on like your desk space, right? I really like the Rebel amp with these because the Rebel amp is really good with more sensitive headphones as well, so you don't get noise floor issues, or at least I didn't. So yeah, I would say something like that, but also you don't need the kind of power. That's the thing. These do not require power. These are 32 ohm headphones. You can run them off of a phone. So in some ways, I'd almost even say pick a DAP, IBASO DX300 or something like that. Because you don't need the crazy Class A amplifiers or anything like that. Like, large desk amplifiers. They're not going to be better for these because the power requirements are so low. Rocky, thank you. If I'm understanding Dr. Tool's book on psychoacoustics imaging, you're talking about sound. Crap, I can't remember the name of it. Something with sound in the title. Dr. Tool's book on psychoacoustics imaging is especially center imaging is highly dependent on HRTF and ear gain. Do you think imaging interpretation has less value in reviews? Sorry if I don't understand that question. I'll try and frame it in a way that I think I understand this. So you're asking about the importance of in-head localization, so not like space and width, but placement and positioning, and its relationship to head-related transfer function and or ear gain. I'm not sure why you ask whether or not imaging interpretation has less value in reviews. Do you mean, I take this to mean like, because it's dependent on individual head related transfer functions, that it's not as valuable because people are going to perceive imaging differently? Because to that, I'm going to say no, specifically because of the head related transfer function. So it's a bit confusing, but like for the same reason that people don't actually hear things as differently as you might get from a measurement that's done at the eardrum, because people have different ears. So let me try and like take a step back and frame this. Someone mentioned this on a HeadFi thread that I happened to come across, that people think that when a headphone's frequency response elevates, that at the ear gain region, so starting around like 1K, that it's the headphone doing this, and that and in reality it's actually our ears that are doing this. Our ears are amplifying that frequency, and that's true. And I like, if I've characterized it the other way, I should apologize for that, because it's not the headphones that are like specifically going up at that one region. Like if you put a microphone in front of a that if it were a speaker, right, and you put a microphone there, it wouldn't measure like that, right? But because we're measuring at the eardrum reference point, we always expect there to be that elevation there. Now, why is this important to what we're talking about? Well, because we're taking measurements at the eardrum reference point, when you swap out to different ears with different different pinna, different concha, different ear canal, and all that stuff, you're going to have different effects there. So what you measure at the eardrum, depending on the person, is going to be different. But that alone doesn't account for people hearing things differently. And that's because everybody has a unique normalization going on there, because you've been living with those gain factors your whole life. Now, again, I've said this in the past, that's there are limits to that, and people do potentially hear things differently because once you get beyond a certain threshold, once you get beyond a certain point, that can probably start to matter. And also sound waves can take different paths to the eardrum, at least so I'm told. And so there are bound to be features that make things actually tangibly sound different to people. But I think more significant than that is the effect of unique coupling to the side of the head, pad compression, clamp pressure, and all these other factors that will actually make it so that not all things are equal when we're talking about the overall ear gain, like the overall gain factors that end up influencing the frequency response measured at the eardrum. So again, I'm not saying that people having different ears has no effect on them hearing things the same or different. It has probably some effect, but I'm also saying that it probably has less of an effect than we think, because we all have unique normalization factors that, well, we necessarily have them, and that bigger differences, or the bigger the thing that's probably more responsible for people having different impressions is to do with coupling, than that, unless we're talking about edge cases. And when it comes to imaging and stuff like that, again, because we all have unique normalization, the fact that you would have a different ear gain measured at the eardrum reference point, I don't think is sufficient to say that we would necessarily have different in-head localization as a result, because we all have we all have unique normalization going on anyways. So this is a long-winded answer, and maybe it's not helpful, but I think to the same degree that there might be some proportional differences in how we hear things based on the fact that we have different ears, there may be some proportional element there with perception of imaging, but I think that's also going to be less significant than we think, at least less significant as it's tied to changes in frequency response or ear gain level, and ear gain shape as a result of having different ears. So and again, like if I took your question like totally the wrong way, do let me know, because I'm just sort of going off what I think you're asking, and I think that's an interesting question. But yeah, I think for as if you kind of go wide on the subject, if you look at like an HD650, most people say that it has fairly poor imaging, or fairly, like the 3 blob effect. That's a very common thing to emerge from that. Similarly, these Focal headphones, not just these, but just Focal headphones in general, they may have better imaging, a more even distribution of imaging, but they don't have they have a fairly intimate kind of presentation. It's not a very wide sense of space and stage. So I think there are these kinds of trends that emerge for a reason, and it's probably because we mostly have a similar in-head localization when we hear this stuff. And I do think to a certain extent that is also tied to frequency response, insofar as there are headphones where you can kind of fake it a little bit. Like there are examples of headphones kind of faking soundstage by doing things in the upper mid-range that give an enhanced sense of space and stage, but that also, I think there's also an additional factor that has more to do with how physically far away the drivers are, to how much it's interacting with the other elements of your ear and that kind of stuff. So like an angle and position and all that stuff. So, and in some ways, yeah, I mean, that also would be related to pad compression and coupling to the side of the head too. So I think you can supersede the actual differences that might show up at the eardrum reference point measurement, or the measurements done at the eardrum reference point, with coupling and clamping, and pad compression and that kind of stuff, as far as what explains the differences. But by and large, even the subjective reports of this stuff are fairly consistent. Like maybe there's somebody out there who hears a 650 and goes, yeah, this is like super spacious. But I think for the most part, people have kind of like come to a similar conclusion about that. And I guess that doesn't mean necessarily that they're hearing that same thing, but at the very least, there seems to be something consistent there. But thank you for the question. Sorry, that was off on a bit of a tangent. That was a good one. R, thank you. Best headphones under $2,600. Perceived impact of the 3 to 4K dip in FR. Not sure what you mean by that. Under 2,600. Are you looking at like the Verite? I'm not totally sure. Maybe Verite. Wait, Verite Closed is like $3,000, isn't it? I'm not sure what they're selling them at right now. And yeah, like the impact of a dip between 3 to 4K is fairly significant on trailing ends of tones and clarity. But at the same time, it can be on the relaxed side if you don't like. So typically, this is where Metal 571 and I will disagree. Like, I think Metal doesn't like too much ear gain, because when you listen to stuff with electric guitars, that can be a little bit biting, even though it might be more tonally correct for other genres like jazz and piano recordings and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd say it depends on what you're looking for. But under $2,600, the best headphone, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's still the HE6. But good luck finding one. And also, yeah, I mean, they're discontinued, right? So that's a tough one. Under 26, you got a number of headphones in that. If you want closed back, probably the Verite Closed, it's around that price. If you want an open back planar, Hifiman Arya. If you want, how much is the LCD-3? I'll need to check what the LCD-3 has for its tuning, because I haven't heard a new one, but that might be something to look at. I think Rad Zero is around that price, but that one also was a little different depending on which one. I evaluated like 4 of them, and 2 of them sounded amazing, and 2 of them were a little bit blunted sounding. So I think it depends on how he makes them for a given person. So because they're a little bit custom. Let's see. I recently got the Danny. Thank you. I recently got the Arya, paired it with my Cord Mojo, but was very underwhelmed by the sound. I decided to get the A90 pairing it with the Mojo, and the sound improved vastly. Was more power reason? Could be, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're running it off the balanced output, that's actually one thing. I mean, I'm not sure what the Mojo has for its current output. I have no idea about that. But also the Mojo is like a portable thing, so. But I would also say that, I mean, you compare, like, I'll need to do this comparison, because when I was comparing the A90 to the Rebel amp, I was using dynamic driver headphones. And when it comes to dynamic driver headphones, it was such an obvious like win for the Rebel amp that it was like, I don't know why I would ever go with the A90. The A90 made it sound pretty bad. But with planars, certain planars and high current and stuff like that, there might be a reason to do that. So I'll need to try it with the Susvara and some other fairly revealing planar magnetic headphones to see if it's as bad for planars as it was for dynamic stuff. So, but that may be something that you're experiencing there. Also, like, there's a lot of psychoacoustic. I'm not saying this applies to you, but like for a lot of people who like the sound of the A90, there's a lot of psychoacoustic effects there, or not even psychoacoustic. It's just like confirmation bias, where somebody tells them that it measures really well on, SynAd, which we know is pretty useless after a certain point, but people seeing how well it ranks makes them think that they're getting a more clean and transparent sound. It's not necessarily the case. But it's that confirmation bias thing that I think rears its head there a lot. Uli, thank you. Would the head-to-phone be different enough to hold its own next to my VC and HD800 with 3 to 4 tube watts? Okay. Does it kick slam a bit more than the Arya? Yeah, absolutely. I think yes to all of those. Yeah, the headphone has a kind of physicality to it. It's not like about punch and slam like the Clear is. It's more about like tactility and like physicality for everything. And I really like that about it. It's very heavy though. Keep that in mind. And yeah, it slams harder than the Arya too. Like has more punch than the Arya. But none of those are like, I think the VC would be the one that slams the hardest out of all those. So if you're really caring about slam, it's like, especially in the bass, the dynamic driver stuff's still the way to go typically, unless you're talking about like an HE6, but or yeah, LCD4. But does it hold its own? Absolutely. I think there's an argument there that the headphone actually has the best sound out of all of them that you mentioned. Now, yeah, I mean, it's probably the argument that I don't know. To me, it would be like somewhere between headphone and the VC, depending on what you want. But yeah, it's really quite good. And I know some people love the HD800. I've said it before, like the tuning for me in the HD800 is just a little too shrill. But I know like Chrono loves it, for example, and actually for the type of music that he likes, I think it's perfect. All right, guys, let's see. We've been going for about an hour and a half. I'll go for a little bit longer here. Some people talking about Grados. Thoughts on the new Grados? I don't understand why there exists hype for Grados. I do not get it. I know people. I know DMS likes it. I can't deal with it. They're all bright and peaky and just they don't sound right. They sound like this sort of harmonically imbalanced thing in the treble. I've never found a Grado that I've liked. The hemp with those other pads, I can see why somebody would like that, but I didn't. I think you have to be a treble head, which I just, like, to me, that stuff exists also for the same reason that the DT1990 is popular. And it's because there's this sort of like, before people would do measurements and understand measurements correctly or fully, because we still don't understand it fully, but there was, people would listen to stuff where it had these treble peaks, and they would think that because there was more coming through there for certain harmonics, that there was more detail going on. I think that same idea has happened with a lot of the Grados, and there's also actually there's a lot of research that's been done on this, but even in the Harman research. But typically, when stuff lacks bass, there is a correlation there with something being more detailed as well. Like people subjectively express that. So it could be just because they're paying attention to certain things that they wouldn't be paying attention to otherwise. But as something that would be enjoyable for music listening, I don't get it. I'm sorry. You think that the headphone got outclassed hard by the GL1200? Yeah, well then you're probably listening to a certain YouTube reviewer a little bit too much, because no, it's just no, that's not even close. It's like it's like hilariously not even close, like not objectively nor subjectively even remotely in the same ballpark. That the 1200 is the ribbon thing, but no, it's not. Let's see. At least, I mean, again, people might want a muted and muffled kind of presentation. Like, again, I can't tell you what you're gonna want, right? But from a like clarity perspective, it's not close. It's really not close. And same with detail. Does anyone know a good set of cans to pair with the JDS Atom stack? Just about everything you want. Yeah, like pairings matter, but they don't matter that much. They matter way more when we start talking about the higher end stuff and with like tubes and whatever else. Under $1,000, the pairings really don't matter that much. Like, as long as you're driving something sufficiently, high current for inefficient planars, that's probably all you need to do. I've already done my thoughts on the LCD-X. You can watch that video. I think it's fine. The new one. I'd still EQ it, but it's easier to EQ now, so that's good. Let's see. Are you using the same headphone? Nice. Thoughts on the House Argons? Argons? That's Ryan's thing. Or other... Are you calling them Hype Train headphones? I don't know if I've called... I don't know. I haven't followed the Hype Train for that. I wouldn't call them Hype Train. Hype Train is like the GL2000 and stuff like that. How have they held up? The descriptions sounded very appealing to me, but I'm skeptical because of the hype, and there's nowhere to try them. Again, I don't know what the hype is for that. I haven't seen it recently. But I do like what Ryan does. I think he's good at anybody who takes this stuff from an enthusiast perspective and gets into tinkering and making their own stuff. I think they typically do a good job. I think his biggest limitation there is the driver, is the T50 RPs, and I think he would also probably admit that. But yeah, no, I from what I've heard of the stuff that he's done, I've enjoyed it, but I can't really comment on that. Any jazz recommendations? Yeah. So if you guys want like a really high quality test track, it is. I'm just gonna pull up the name here. Oh, there it is. So there's an album by Eero Rantala. He's a Finnish jazz pianist, called My History of Jazz, and it's not just him, but it's a bunch of European jazz musicians, and there's a one particular track on My History of Jazz that is probably my most common go-to reference track for how instruments sound. It's called, well, there's two. One of them is called Eronel, Eronel, and the other one is called Americans in Paris. And there's a few other tracks. It's just a very well recorded album. So if you want to know like really good, jazz and stuff like that, like well recorded stuff, that album is solid. Some of it's like it's very like it's just piano, like it's just solo piano, and I kind of don't use those because I want to hear what something sounds like with percussive instruments and stuff like that, and double bass and whatever else. But for those two tracks in particular, they have it. Did I get a chance to try out the different ribbons on the GL1200? No, I didn't. So there might be I saw that there was a post there with several different ribbons, and yeah, maybe there's a difference there, but I just had to only evaluated the one that was sent to me. But I actually saw that it was the one that people liked more in a number of different places. So I mean, to me, that everything I've heard so far from Gold Planar has been kind of like a let's see how the market handles this, right? Without that much thought given to tonal balance and tuning. Like it doesn't seem like that's the case. The more I'm actually in the process of learning a lot about and just researching a lot, like spending so much time trying to figure out planar magnetic headphones in general. And I know we're not talking about planar here, but like as an example, with planars, you can find tunings that are quite a bit all over the place, and I think the reason for that might be because things are being engineered for certain parameters more so than what stuff is supposed to sound like, as far as like having a good tonal balance there. And the ones who have kind of like hit the sweet spot there, it typically ends up being the HiFi man planars. Not in all cases. There are definitely some HiFi man planars where I've been like, what is going on here? Like that R10P that I evaluated. But generally, like the Sundara and the Ananda and all that stuff, like they've kind of been able to get both. But you also see a lot of planars that are engineered for other parameters, where there's like no consideration given to the tuning or tonal balance. And I think a lot of that might actually just come from engineers not really even like knowing about that. Like for example, if you design something that looks like it measures flat on a given rig, then you think that's a good thing, but you like the PM50 is a good example. They just didn't know that flat meant compensated to a target, and so that when they saw it measure flat on a raw graph, they're like, this is good, but that's the opposite of what you would want. So I think there's definitely it's I don't want to say like make blanket statements here or say anything across the board, because it's not the case, right? But there are some cases where there's just not as much consideration given to to tonal balance and tuning, and more given to can we hit this particular target with THD or whatever else, or make it out of this material and see what we can get with this material because it's easier to produce or whatever else, right? Okay, let's see. Yogi, thank you. What's a good price for a used HE6 six screw? Is $1,300 a good deal? I would Burst and Soloist XP3. I haven't heard the Burst and Soloist, so I can't comment on that. But yeah, like 8 watts is sufficient. Like you don't even need like you. Again, you can drive it off of much more modest stuff, but the question there is like, what do you want to get the most out of it? In which case, I mean, there's good reasons to go with a high current amplifier. There's good reasons to go with a crazy expensive Bakun or maybe even a speaker amplifier, right? But I mean, yeah, you can easily run it with way more modest equipment. A Magnius can run it. What's a good price? So I also recognize that I may have inadvertently. Well, I knew this was going to happen. I sort of expected it to happen, but I didn't want it to happen. But the recent review I did, or comparison I did, probably drove the price up on the used ones a little bit. Because I do think that it is the best headphone that I've heard under $2,000. So yeah, $1,300 would be fine. It's a bit on the high side because I've seen stuff for less than that. I've seen stuff for around 1,000. I've seen stuff for like 800. So I think it's on the high side, but at the same time, it's still a really good headphone. I think the worry that I would have with that is like the longevity of used products, because those were released in 2011, and I'm not sure when they actually discontinued them. But yeah, that's more what I would be worried about, is you're putting a lot of money into something that is a used product. I don't generally recommend buying stuff used because you don't know what the person's done to it. You don't know whether they've tried to run it off a crazy speaker amplifier that was not the right thing, and like you don't know. So yeah, I generally worry about that, but what can you do? They're not produced anymore, right? So that's why like I can't really recommend the HE6 as the best headphone under $2,000, because it's just because you can't buy it new anymore. So yeah. Is the Rebel amp for the Arya good? Yeah, it's fine. This is another thing. Like planars do change their not their frequency. They do change off of different amplifiers, but they don't change the way that a 300 ohm Sennheiser would change, or they don't change. Like there's a different kind of improvement that you get, and I think again the main thing that you'd be looking at is like with an HE6, do you get the full extent of its punch and slam out of a out of whatever amplifier, out of a THX 789? The answer is probably not, even though it gets loud enough. So that's why paying attention to things like high current is probably a good idea. But I don't get into I don't care as much about the amplifiers and that kind of stuff, because in most cases, in like 99% of cases, the difference isn't as significant as the difference would be if you just went with a higher end headphone. So I'm always going to recommend spending less money on the source and more money on the headphones, unless we're talking about high-end tube amps like the Amps and Sound stuff, because then that kind of throws that on its head a little bit. Leonid, thank you. Did you have a question? Alexis Cole, yes, that's another. Alexis Cole's stuff is generally pretty good as well for testing headphones. Mm-hmm. I don't see a question, Leonid. But thank you. Oh, I see you did a sticker. Focal Utopia, Joel, this says Focal Utopia versus HE1000 SE versus Susvara, purely in terms of detail retrieval, ignoring soundstage, tonality, etc. Yeah, Susvara, absolutely. And thank you, by the way. Yeah, so I'm going to describe it like this. The Utopia is the most detailed dynamic driver headphone. The Susvara is among the most detailed planar magnetic headphones out there, and yes, it is more detailed than the HE1000 SE, but not much. They're in the same category, I would say, but Susvara I think is like still a little bit more for microdynamics and micro detail, and also the Susvara has a better dynamics. Now the Utopia still has better dynamics than just about everything out there. Like it's probably still the most punchy headphone that I've heard, and competes more with this HE6. That'll be fun to compare them for punch and slam, but it's tough because they don't have the same actual bass level either. So, and this Vivara does actually have some decent punch to it, just not quite on the level of the Utopia. And also, I don't think you should ignore tonal balance, because if you like the Abyss stuff, I think is a good example of this. The Abyss stuff is ridiculously detailed, but it's not as well balanced for its tuning as the Susvara or the Focal Utopia. And I'll need to hear them side by side. I don't think that the AB1266 is particularly more detailed than the Susvara. I think they're about on the same level, but I might change my mind on that if I actually got a chance to hear them side by side. But even if it is more detailed, the fact that the Susvara nails the tuning makes it such an easy recommendation for me over the 1266, because that's the thing that they haven't, at least the one that I heard, they haven't quite been able to kind of figure out yet. And maybe they will. Maybe they're onto a new revision where they've actually nailed that. But from what I heard, it sounded a lot closer to like an LCD4, which is a similar kind of like, it's a similar kind of question there about crazy technical performance versus what sounds right. And the Susvara, in my opinion, is like the conjunction of those two things. And the Utopia is kind of like the dynamic driver version of that. So yeah. Let's see. A couple more questions here, guys. I wonder if we said anything spicy in today's stream that people are talking about. I see. Who is the... Oh, people talking about Zeos. You can't get away from Zeos. He will haunt you in your dreams. Oh, I hope not. That's... The other topic that I wanted to talk about today, well, again, this is something I'm going to probably make more a series of videos on, or just talk about in general, is the idea of dogmatically following one particular reviewer or another. And people, myself included, have called this sort of audio simping in the past, where basically you don't really bother doing critical thinking on your own. You just blindly follow what one particular person says, and you don't even question whether or not they got that right. And this, I'm including myself in this, because I don't want people. I certainly wouldn't want people, referencing something that I've said as like, because he says it, therefore whatever somebody else might say, which would be a different opinion, is wrong. Like I certainly wouldn't hope people are doing that. I don't think I've come across that, but yeah. As an example, Kryn and I will generally agree on many things, but there are times when we disagree about stuff. And I think the fact that we disagree on a few things, like this headphone in particular, I think that's a good example of why you shouldn't just dogmatically follow, one perspective or another. Another example is obviously the ASR stuff. I was dealing with it with the comments that existed that showed up on Precog's recent Clear video, where someone was referencing, one of the articles by ASR on the Clear. And this is nothing about, at the moment, about the way he's doing measurements or anything like that, but more so about the following that gets generated there, that's done in such a dogmatic fashion where there's no questioning of whether or not that was not just correct, but whether that was like the type of thing that should be relevant to everybody. And it was only just, this guy does measurements, therefore he's right. And it's like, well, okay, but lots of people do measurements. Human beings are fallible. And so what I think we need to do collectively or generally is to not have a particular, like, as myopic of a perspective on this stuff, or dogmatic perspective for reviewers, for communities. You know, it feels like we're all just sort of like siloed in these different communities. Like there's the SBAFers, there's the Headfires, there's, you know, the HiFi guides folks, there's the ASR folks, and they're all so siloed and entrenched in their communities that they're unable to kind of like see past that. And what I see very commonly there is, oh, so and so said this thing isn't as very good, therefore I think it sucks, even though I've never heard it. Right? That's the kind of thing that I see way too commonly. And what I think we should do is, instead of like treating any of these particular, you know, information sources or silos or groups or reviewers as, you know, perfect indicators of truth about a subject, and more so just as people who are giving perspectives and ideas and hypotheses and things like that, because, you know, we're all fallible. We all are prone to, you know, making mistakes. Measurements are frequently done incorrectly. And even if they're done correctly, they're oftentimes interpreted incorrectly or analyzed incorrectly. And I'm not saying like I'm, you know, above the rest of this too. I'm also fallible. I've made mistakes in the past too. And I think, you know, recognizing that fact is important, that, you know, people are bound to get it wrong. I think it's actually something that Metal and I talked about at one point in one of our streams recently, but it's, you know, nobody's going to get it like perfectly right 100% of the time. And so that's why I think it's important to just not blindly follow one information source or one perspective. And I'd want people to like try and learn for themselves. Like, I think that's really the takeaway here is like, you know, try and educate yourself a little bit about this stuff. That's one of the reasons, like one of the things that I want to do with this channel is, and just the content platform that we have in general, is make it so that people can, you know, rather than, you know, giving a man a fish, I want to, you know, teach a man to fish. That's sort of the goal, I guess, because then you don't need to be beholden to these particularly, you know, let's say authoritative or dogmatic, you know, information silos. But I don't know. I had this other example that I wanted to bring up, and maybe I will in another video. But if anybody's done any contemporary philosophy, there's a wonderful, at least in analytic philosophy, there's a wonderful problem called a Gettier problem, or a Gettier case. And to describe a little bit, it goes something like there's a description of a person driving through a countryside, and in the countryside there he, you know, points at what he thinks is a barn and says, "I know that's a barn." Now, what he didn't know was that this particular area of the countryside was a place that had a ton of fake barns put up, or barn facades put up. And so they look like a real barn to the average person driving by. And the barn that he happened to point at did happen to be a real barn. And so he's right when he says that I know that that's a barn. But he could have just as easily pointed at any of the other barns, fake barns that existed, and said, I know that's a barn, and be wrong. So the fact that he got it right, it meant that he got it right by accident, or it was just dumb luck that he happened to be pointing at the one that was correct. Intuitively, that means that, like, intuitive to us, I think, is, or the takeaway at least from that paper, is that this isn't sufficient to count as knowledge of, you know, particular information. By the way, that fake barn thing apparently is a real thing. Like, there is apparently a real area somewhere in like Eastern Europe, I think, where there's a whole bunch of fake barns. But in any case, so anyways, the idea about getting it right by accident, or getting, you know, pointing at, for example, pointing at a measurement and saying, this is why this sounds like that. Now, it might sound like a given, you know, say Headphone X is particularly, you know, dead sounding. Okay, you can point at a measurement and say, this is why that sounds particularly dead. And you might be right about it sounding particularly dead. And you're also right about pointing at the measurement and saying, you know, here's where something, you know, shows, you know, a drop off or something like that. But that, it could be totally dead sounding for completely different reasons. And, you know, pointing at the measurement and saying, you know, one thing or another thing is not actually the reason for that. And so you're right, and you're getting the right conclusion, but you're not getting it right for the right reasons. And that intuitively is, it's intuitively not a good relationship to information and knowledge when you're constantly doing this kind of stuff. And what I worry about in the audio world, or at least in the headphone world, is that A, we're constantly doing this, but then B, we're also using the wrong reasons to predict things in the future. When we come across other examples, or especially because we don't have the opportunity, like not everybody has the opportunity to listen to everything. Like reviewers are fortunate because we can, listen to lots of different stuff. But if you're just, the average person at home looking at data, or looking at, even just like here, watching a review or something like that, you don't have the opportunity to like actually listen to that thing yourself unless you buy it. And that's where some of these fake barn problems end up having somewhat of a sinister outcome, and it's that people are using the wrong reasons to predict what something might potentially sound like, when in reality it won't. And so that's why I think that's why I like to bring up that example of the Gettier case, the Gettier problem. And I don't, it doesn't track perfectly, but I do see that kind of thing happening a lot. So yeah, I know that's off a bit of a tangent. What is a fake barn? No, it's like it shows just the front of. So I guess I should have explained that. It's a facade. It shows just the front of it, so it looks like a barn, but it's like a 2-dimensional thing that's meant to look like a 3-dimensional thing. Yeah, just Google it. It'll make sense. It's like what they used to shoot like the old Western movies with. They had like there wouldn't actually be saloons and stuff like that, or like houses when people were walking through the town. It'd just be like little props that are on sticks that would look like it from a certain angle. Yeah. I know there's a bit of a tangent, but it's something that like it's a particular bee in my bonnet that I see a lot, and I think there's no other way to describe it other than calling it audio simping, or just it's the dogma that I want people to kind of like hedge against that a little bit and just think, okay, this is an idea, or this is a perspective, or this is this person's perspective. This is what this person thinks. It's a hypothesis, not, this is how it is, because this person said it. I think that's, yeah. We need to be able to kind of see beyond just one particular person's, or not even a person, one particular, group or information source. Did you get rid of your XCs? No, they are right there. This is just the Celestee. Are you into philosophy? Ever heard of Alan Watts? Yeah, I have. I have 2 degrees in philosophy. Did my master's and my undergrad in analytic philosophy. That's actually like it's kind of weird that I'm doing this now, because it's nothing to do with that. At least not really. But I was my background is very much rooted in that part of academia, and I was working towards eventually doing a PhD and all that stuff, and teaching and whatever else, and eventually it just it turns out there's no money in that. But it's not about that even. It's about it's you end up in weird situations where I think there's a lot of people who unless they are like at the top of the top of the top, which I wasn't. I was like, whatever I lacked in actual ability, I made up for with hard work. But the people who are like at the very top, they're the ones who actually get to enjoy it, in my opinion, and everybody else is sort of like fighting for the scraps, at least in my particular area that I was in. And I just saw it as like I'm just not as good as these other people. So it's not even 100% about wrong or right. Like ASR, for example, tonal balance is the most important thing. If the same applies to you, then ASR's viewpoint is very valuable to you. If not, then no. Not sure what you mean by if the same applies. Yeah, like I think it's worth including perspectives that only value that as well. Like I should clarify something there. It's not just about tonal balance, and I don't think it is there either. I think it's that the indexing is for just one particular, like, what's going on there is because you can measure it, therefore that's what there is. I think that seems to be the general sentiment. But there's a related component to that I think is worth taking seriously, and it's that it's entirely possible that literally everything that matters for sound quality is captured by frequency response, or at least all the other aspects, like, for example, detail and all the rest of that stuff that we're calling the subjective stuff. It's entirely possible that that's all somehow captured by frequency response, and we're just not analyzing it in terms of that. So when you're looking at the data and you're looking at measurements and stuff like that, I don't think it's a bad thing to do. Like, I think it's good that it's a good thing to do, measurements and stuff like that. And when you don't have any other way of explaining these other subjective qualities, which, by the way, those articles do contain subjective takes. That's the thing I think people kind of miss. If there's no other way to show it, then it's worth actually analyzing FR in terms of these other qualities, which is what I'm waiting for somebody to do. But so far, nobody's done it. But as an example, we measure on the Gross as well. So like we're conducting measurements on a compatible rig. So it's good to have other stuff to compare it with, if that makes sense. I saw a review the other day that claimed the focal clears were metallic sounding. Was that from Precog? You know what I liked about his review? So like, I agree with basically everything he said there. And he's also run into the issue of, I think, people not being able to deal with nuance as much, because it was a very nuanced review, and to understand his perspective on that. But basically everything he said there, I think, is right. What I found really interesting about that review, though, was that it showed something that, or it expressed something that I think is often missed with some of the subjective stuff that we like to talk about when it comes to timbre. And he was able to isolate it in terms of FR, which I thought was pretty cool, because like, I've been saying that for a while now, that like the stuff that we call as timbre is potentially available or captured by frequency response, and certainly with the focal stuff, it kind of demonstrates that. So that's I think more of that kind of stuff is very useful, because a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, metallic driver, metallic sound, or metal driver, metal sound. That's not what's going on here. There are a series of peaks that are harmonically balanced with one another, such that they don't throw off the tonal balance in any particular way. However, perceptually, that sounds like things have a particular kind of metallic sheen to them, which also means that you can, in theory, fix timbre with EQ. Or fix is the wrong word here, because again, some people like that, but you can, in theory, change timbre with EQ. We are all in the cult of resolve. Well, see, I hope not, is what I'm saying. I hope that that people are able to understand that I am also just giving my perspective. I'm also just giving my ideas, my hypotheses, and I don't think that I don't think I'm infallible either. Like, I think I'm also prone to making mistakes, and I certainly have made them in the past. So like, the whole point of what I'm doing here is I'm trying to do like as much research as I can, learn as much as I can, and then report my findings and express my thoughts and opinions about various different things when I'm evaluating something. That's really like, and what gets unfortunate, I think, is if something is shown to be false, or you find that your initial assumption was wrong, when you cling to it and stick to it, I think that's really where some of the danger lies, because people it's difficult to come to grips with being wrong, and I'm also susceptible to that too. So I think we can all do a better job there of being able to say, yeah, no, I was wrong, and I've changed my mind about this, and I think this is right, and what I said before was wrong. So hopefully we can all do that and get better at doing that. But that's also not to say that everything is like, relative, or like I am not at all a relativist. I think that's crazy. Like, there is a fact of the matter about whether one thing is more detailed than another thing, right? Or more, there just is. But because of all these other different things that show up, like all the other framing effects and psychoacoustic effects and whatever else, it becomes difficult to get perfect clarity on one thing or another. And so that's why then people talk about the subjective nature of this hobby, which is I've talked about it before, but it's subjective to a point. There are some things that are subjective here. How you want your music to sound is certainly subjective, but what constitutes good sound is a little bit less subjective than people think. Or it's not subjective in the terms that people think. Thinking of switching to Qobuz. Some say it sounds warmer. No. I mean, I'm gonna say unlikely. I can't. I think that's another thing where like people convince themselves of it's like the cable question, right? It hasn't been shown to make a difference, but some people still are convinced by it. So what I'm going to say there is, if you are convinced by it, then there's the potential that you're actually hearing things differently because you're paying attention to things in a different way. But that's still a psychoacoustic thing, more likely than not. Trying to find a good amp for the Susvara. The Army ADI2 can't power these cans. Monolith 887 is decent, but that's it. Best results, shit Ragnarok 2, and it's a huge brick. Any advice? Yeah, I also wouldn't use the Army ADI2. That's just mostly a DAC, and it has a output, but yeah, I would use that more just for the DAC. Haven't tried the 887. I generally think that the THX stuff probably isn't going to be the way to go for this Susvara. You could probably power it, but I think you're better off going with a I think you're better off going with something that's more high current. And yeah, you're like, there's lots of stuff out there that was designed around that. Like IHA6 is a great example. I keep talking about that one, but that's like, it's not good for other stuff, but that is specifically the thing that it is good at. Trying to think of what else. That Soundaware P1 thing was pretty crazy. That'd probably be pretty good for it. I'm not sure how much that is though. I mean, I know people talk about the Bakun thing, but that's like $6,000 or something like that, right? So, and it's actually not it's smaller than I thought it would be. But yeah, I'll be doing evaluation with of the Susvara with the Bakun and some other amplifiers. So maybe just stay tuned for that. Yeah, so he's talking about the clear having a series of peaks there, and when you EQ those down, it's less metallic sounding. Yeah, it's exactly what's going on. It's not like, if you think about the Beyerdynamic DT1990, right? That has a massive peak at 8.5K, where that one region is particularly elevated by like a good 6 to 10 dB, like over the rest of the tonal balance there. It's enormous. So maybe, okay, not 10, but like at least 6 dB too high. That's not what's going on with the clear. The clear, it's like where the peaks are, like the top of those peaks, is about where you want the balance to be. So it's just a more ragged response. It's just not as smooth as might be desirable. And because of that, you hear where those elevations are, even though they're balanced harmonically for themselves, you hear those harmonics a little bit higher than you would others. And in music, because music is very complex, occasionally tones that token those harmonics will have those elements a little bit elevated relative to the fundamental. Stuff like that, at least in comparison to where things are, dipped down a little bit. But as an example, if you smooth that headphones frequency response to be the same smoothing that the target is smooth to, you'll see that it actually matches pretty closely. So it's not bright, it's not warm, it's actually fairly balanced, fairly neutral. It'd be a little bit more relaxed than the target, if you like that target, for example, which most people do. But because it's a more ragged response that's sort of punctuated by a series of peaks there, sometimes people get that sort of that sort of sheen kind of comes through a little bit. Has the Utopia QC gotten better, or is it still a concern? I have not actually heard of it there being any issues with Utopias. Maybe like way early on in 2016, but this is the thing, like I've never had any QC issues with Focal headphones. I've never had any clipping issues, nothing. Not even the stuff that was sent by Massdrop, like the Alex, and it had no problems. And I've gone through. That's not to say they don't exist. I'm just saying I haven't personally experienced them. The only ones that I've had to deal with that had QC issues, and it wasn't actually a QC issue. It was an issue that I think happened during shipping. Was the one of the Aliers it's right here. One of the Aliers had one of the screws had come loose somehow on the inside of the cup and was rattling around, so I had to take the driver out, put the screw back in, and then put it back. But I think that was something that happened during shipping or something like that, and that's really the only issue that I've ever come across. And then of course there's that question about the pads and whatnot, which I still don't know the answer to. So I'm sure that those issues exist. I'm sure. I'm just saying I've never come across them personally, so I can't really comment on stuff that I haven't experienced. And the same thing with HiFi Man. I've come across some like the older ones that fell apart a little bit more, but the newer ones I haven't had any issues with. So and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Like the Audeze stuff, I've never had any issues with those. I know people talk about some. I think there's just issue. Like there's always question marks. There's always going to be failure rates for every brand. The only time that I really had something die on me, there were two products that died. One was a DCA Aeon, original Aeon, and it didn't die. It was just one driver, it was just like way lower volume than the other one. So there was an issue there, and they just replaced it. They just fixed it. And then the other issue that I came across was the Harmonic Dyne Zeus. One of the channels also, it developed a pretty bad channel imbalance there. There was a The-Audio Clairvoyance that died on us, but that was also because I sent it down to precog and it died like one channel. I think it was actually the treble died on it completely, so some of the BAs may have been damaged during the shipping. I'm not sure what happened there or how that even happens. But yeah, for the most part, I haven't had issues. I think that the other thing with that is like you're more likely to see stuff online from people who have had issues than not. And I think it's probably true that the failure rates for certain companies are higher than others, but you also have to keep in mind the base rate and how many people are actually buying headphones of a certain company. So if a company is really popular, they're more likely to be reports of failure rates or of the examples of failures than the more boutique stuff, where those failure rates are probably the same or pretty similar, just that because there's fewer people buying them, you don't hear about it as much. So I think there's a lot of a lot of those questions there about base rate and things like that. So I don't think it's safe to say, you see a lot of reports about X company having X issues, even though they might exist. I don't think it's enough to say that that's more common with those ones than anything else, because we just don't see the failure rates. I think the Hifiman stuff is probably the best example of like QC issues. because they're typically have been that in the past. And I think that a lot of the newer stuff's not as prone because they probably were worried about that. But like as an example, the older pads in the Hifiman Sundara would, and not just the Sundara, but like those older hybrid pads, they would just disintegrate over time. And so that was one of the reasons, as far as I understand, that was one of the reasons for the 2020 pad revision. It was that it was meant to make it so that they didn't disintegrate over time, and it just resulted in a tuning improvement as well. Sennheiser, yeah, Sennheiser. You know, actually, that's another one. I came across the first 660S I tried to evaluate had a massive channel imbalance as well. So even Sennheiser is not immune to this. But I will say that Sennheiser, from what I understand and what I've been told about their production facility and the way that they make stuff, their tolerances are like tighter than anybody else's in the industry. So at least they were. I can't speak to what they're like now. I'm not sure about that, because they sold off their consumer division. So I don't know what that's going to be like. Yeah, please make a headphone tier list. Yeah. I have a spreadsheet. I just have nowhere to publish it. Yeah, HE600 has a great frequency response. It's a great tuning. 560S as well. 600 is more technically impressive though. Although 560S has better soundstage. All right, guys. I think this is gonna do it for the stream. We've been 2 hours now, so thanks to everybody for your questions. I know we got a little bit off track there and got a little bit tangential, but yeah, a lot of it is stuff it's fairly important to me, and I think I'll try and do more videos where I express this stuff and think about it and kind of try and make it a little bit more digestible to make more sense, because it's been rattling around in there for a while, and I feel like it sort of needs to be expressed, but I'm not sure the right structure or format to do that in, so I'll see what I can do. But yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in, and thanks to everybody who had your super chats. I gotta double check I didn't miss any. I don't think I did, but yeah, thanks to everybody who participated, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.